Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to make the case for why the squat, bench, and deadlift, for at least the majority of us, should be our primary focus of our exercises, and not just for power lifters. And I think what people are going to be surprised is that, yes, I believe because they are the classic lifts in powerlifting, that were chosen because they test between the three of them pretty much every muscle in the body except the biceps, right? Again, but I'm also real big on pull-ups and chin-ups. They test every muscle in the body except maybe the biceps, which means they work every muscle in the body. They let us move big weights through a significant range of motion. Now, that being said, that is our recipe for hypertrophy. And granted, I understand, and agree wholeheartedly with the statement that no specific exercise is required to maximize hypertrophy. Right? There is no single one exercise that you have to do to make the most gains possible. Okay? And I still agree with that statement when I make this statement. But just because that is the case doesn't mean that there aren't some good reasons to pick certain exercises. And here's where I'm going to go with this. Since we know that these three exercises are basically capable of developing 85%, some people would argue 90%, we'll go with 85% of the muscles in your entire body just by themselves, it makes a lot of sense to use them as a primary focus. Now, here's where we get into why the fact that they're the three power lifts is important here. I want people to think about something for a moment. If we're going to use lifts that we're going to do a lot of tonnage with and a lot of workload with, having good information available on those lifts is useful to us. Right? It's useful to us from a coaching perspective, from a lifting perspective, everything else. So if we were to take these three lifts and find three other lifts that work the exact same amount of muscle, but that were not heavily coached and heavily researched with specific strength standards, I would argue that that's a disadvantage if the hypertrophy is equal. And that's going to be the basis of my argument here. And one reason I believe you should focus on these. If the big three for powerlifting were chosen to be something else, I would be inclined, if they were still just as big exercises, I would be inclined to argue then that those movements should be used. It's because they are specifically used as the classic lifts in the largest, most popular strength sport that it makes them valuable for training purposes. So let's get into why. All right, these lifts have been coached by thousands and thousands of top-level coaches over the years. Because they are very competitive and powerlifting is a massive sport, there is an enormous amount of coaching and information about how to change the leverages, change the mechanics, safely adjust, increase, decrease ranges of motion, things like that, to make these movements either work certain muscles harder, to allow us to lift more weight, to perform them safer, right? Techniques have been developed to lift enormously heavy weights on these movements safely. This has all been figured out by coaches, okay? And when you start using the large tonnages of weight, this starts to matter because people say, well, I'm not maxing out. Well, I actually don't really max out much either myself these days. Right? I'm getting largely to the point where I think we should only max out at an actual competition. So it's kind of besides the point, isn't it? You're still moving a lot of tonnage. And if you're going to get big, you're going to have to move a lot of tonnage. You're going to have to move some relatively heavy weights for a whole lot of reps at certain points in your training if you want to get big. I think, again, anyone who understands the research and the real world agrees with that point. Lift moderately heavy for a whole lot of reps without getting hurt and then recover from it. Well, these are movements that we understand enough that we know which techniques and methods cause inflammation cause pain, they cause problems because they're so heavily coached and so heavily researched in the lab with so much data on them. EMG data, hypertrophy data, right? Strength standard data. We have enormous amounts of data for these lifts. It makes sense, therefore, to use them because we have the most available data. And I think when people say, oh, well, I don't think we should, you're being a contrarian. Okay, we could argue about the deadlift. The deadlift is a point of contention for hypertrophy, although I think the data supports that it is arguably one of the best hypertrophy exercises ever. It's a point of contention with the experts. The bench and the squat are not. The leading experts all agree that the bench press is arguably capable of developing the entire chest top to bottom. It's a great front delt, great tricep builder, great all-around muscle builder. We all agree that the squat is an enormous lower body builder. I didn't say quad, I mean a lower body. All the major muscles. Core developer. Okay. I would argue the deadlift can build your whole back and particularly your posterior chain and your core. Right? You're being a contrarian just to be one. You're hating on popular things just to sound cool. All right? The person who does that is like that person who says, well, I didn't like Game of Thrones. It's like the most popular TV show of all time. You sound like a jackass. And that's exactly what happens when you say, oh, I just hate the squat, bench, and deadlift. They're popular. And then we come over to the other point, and this is maybe the big problem a lot of people have. We have solid strength standards on them, both in strength and conditioning circles, research circles, and tens of thousands of people who compete on these three lifts so that you know where you stand on them at any given time. And I didn't say you have to test your max to know that. You know what? Your heavy 5-rep set, you can calculate your max off that. You know where you stand. You know, if you can do 500 pounds for 5 reps, I promise you can max 550, right? Should be no doubt in your mind. You can walk over and hit 550 on that lift. Notice I didn't even say which of the three. We have endless strength standards to compare ourselves to others with. On these lifts, you know how you stack up at any given time. You know what the standards are. You can set benchmarks based upon charts, or you can set benchmarks based upon competition numbers, maybe just for your state or your region, or national level, world level, for your weight and your age. Okay. We have all this data available. That is why they are useful, specifically because they're so heavily studied and so heavily used and so heavily coached in competition. It gives them an advantage over other lifts for training purposes. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.